Right, now we're joined by David Costa. Dr. David Costa is Dean of Robert Kennedy College and joins us live from Zurich. Do you know what I love about this show? Is 10 minutes ago I had Martin Hennecker telling me, and I'll quote, there could be a collapse of the Western financial system. Now, David, I've got you saying to me the banking crisis has been solved by the ECB bazooka. Why are you right and Martin's wrong?
Well, I think in December, if you remember, we were discussing on whether the banks will be brave enough to go and implement this very attractive carry trade. And we now have the answer. We have seen yield stepping back. We have seen banking, the forecast is that it will be tapping up to even €1 trillion by the next time at the end of February. So I think that the crisis has been pretty much solved by the European Central Bank with this 3 years liquidity window. So at least for the time being, I don't see how a bank would be in a liquidity problem with this very big facility in place. I'm not saying that all the crises have been solved, but I feel that the European crisis started as a banking crisis, which then also been combined with the sovereign crisis together. Because of this close link between the two, sort of unwanted marriage, I see the resolution coming forward, unless, of course, we have an unexpected event like a default or we have a break in the discussion that we are now in the situation with Greece and so on. So that, of course, depends on what happens there. But provided that we don't have such a shocking news, I don't see how we're going to see a bigger crisis, deterioration of the European banking sector.
Why do you think the marriage counselling is going to work, to use your analogy then, not end in divorce? Let's face it, Greece looks no nearer to actually lowering its huge debt piles. We just seem to be kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
Well, I think while we tend to generalize the situation of Europe as a global problem, there are substantial differences between, for example, the problem in Greece and the situation in Italy, which is the biggest market here in terms of bonds. And so, for example, in the case of Italy, I see really no reason why the bank wouldn't have taken advantage, and the Italian banks are among the first to take advantage of this facility, of this carry trade, because it's a bit of a totally unthinkable to say that the government will, in a way, collapse or default and the banks will survive. So I think the marriage have to continue in this regard. The situation in Greece is entirely different, in my opinion, as it is the one of Portugal. So we tend, particularly foreign investors, tend to say, oh, I'm not investing anything in Europe at all, I'm not touching in Europe at all besides German bonds and so on. But I think there are substantial differences, and one has to look carefully about all those differences before making a decision. Greece is a very different case, very difficult case, which I think can only be solved with accepting from the side of Greece some sort of oversight from Europe to put their accounts in order, because for the last 3 years we keep having promises but nothing really happening. So we need some sort of help, because if we're going to pay the bill, we're also going to have some control of what is going to happen next.
David, so Christine, if you say the banking crisis is already being resolved over in the Eurozone, does that mean you will be buying banking stocks?
Well, back in December, I sort of retweeted and I said the attraction of a bank trade sort of waned with the risk being too high, which I think now has totally changed with this facility. So yes, I think now let's not forget that we had, in European equities in general, not just on the banking sector, the best start of the year since '98, and I see this to continue. So banks, I think now, given that we have taken away the big incognita of the recapitalization from many of the European banks, are indeed an attractive trade. Now, again, there is this big caveat that we have to get everything right and avoid any type of default or shocking event in Europe, because if that happens, that could be a real threat.
When you talk about getting everything right, I mean, there are all these concerns that we're focusing so much on the debt restructuring of either Greece or Portugal that we fail to address growth issues. Isn't that a big issue to you? Are you seeing enough from policymakers that makes you think there is enough growth being generated in the Eurozone?
That's really the big issue, because creating growth in an environment where you have all those austerity measures, it is very difficult. On the other hand, you cannot sort the mess without first tackling the debt issue. You cannot have growth either. So I think we're going to lead probably to a sort of mild recession in many of the European countries affected by these problems. And there is really no way out. When you have this massive amount of debts, you can't handle it. You need to also implement pro-growth action, but the first bigger issue is the one to restore the confidence of investors. And if I may say, it doesn't really help to go on the drawing board and make always these 2 steps back, which I don't know which of the party in Europe, but it's really a political issue here, because we keep having some agreement and then a disagreement, and that's particularly damaging for the markets. So I think it would be very good if we could get a resolution of the Greek problem within the first half of this month. And then I think if that incognita is out of the table, I don't see the same problem with Portugal, which have been said by the International Monetary Fund and the European Union that their debt level is sustainable. So I think Greece has a unique situation, which also we saw that we can move on with the rest of the plans.
David, very nice to hear from you today, and very nice to hear from someone so optimistic as well. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, Dr. David Costa, Dean at Robert Kennedy College. OK, well, the opening calls for the European market.